Hello guys, Raz here, and today on Wanderer Wednesday I will bring you a match between my Sylvia and a friend's Zero deck, which he just created for that reason. It seems that he's going first in the first game, and we both draw our hand. I see the few cards that I will shuffle beneath the deck, and I will especially keep the Gleipnir and the Cthugha, since they both are very good cards. He decides not to mulligan and starts the game. Down comes the Heaven's Rift, and he plays the Acolyte of the Sun with that. A simple mana dog which taps for white. I play a stone. It's a red stone, but because of Sylvia I could use it for green if I wanted to. I of course play the Gleipnir since it's a free card, and then I will drop my Sylvia but incarnate her into Cthugha. There comes my first mistake. I should have forced him to block with that Acolyte of the Sun, but instead I will just let him take the 5 damage. Gleipnir is a very good card since it can force a block of a J Resonator. Down comes the second Magic Stone on his side, the Ancient Magic Stone. He decides to pay the 300 life to not let it income rested. In the end that was a kind of waste on his side since he had the Acolyte of the Sun anyways. Down comes the Light Palace, which is very good since his deck is mostly tribal on humans and fairy tales. He thinks a bit and then he ends his turn, and his Acolyte untaps in his end step because she is a human, and the addition lets him recover a human or fairy tale J Resonator in his end step. I get my second beautiful Fire Magic Stone and play the Fire Dude and swing for 5. 6, yes. He decides whether or not to play a card. He decides to take the damage. I react to that and Burnt Cooking to make my Cthugha into a glass cannon, which then deals 10 damage to his face. A fairly risky play, since he didn't really decide whether to block or not. But yes. Then during his recovery step I kill his Acolyte of the Sun. So he does not get will. Puts it in the wrong pile here, but that's okay since he will put it in the right pile very soon. Yes. Untap having some small difficulties. He asked me to, not keep this match in the video since he, will probably lose this game, but I decide to keep it in the game and he does as well. Dropping his 5 stone, again a dual stone with light and darkness, and then he ends his turn. I draw the Sylvia, one of the two, which is a fairly good card since it has swiftness in this deck. I swing for 6, and he blocks that and uses the crystals to deal 400 damage to me. They trade, and well, my Ktuga is gone. But now I'm still unsure whether to play the Sylvia or not. I decide to do anyway and swing for 9. He responds and removes her from the game. With Zero's flashing lights, it's a 2-cost chant, but it costs 1 less since his ruler is 0. And I end my turn. It makes a 4th stone. And thinks on what to play. For 3, down comes the Excalibur X. A rather good card in his deck since Zero does not take battle damage. That's J Ruler. And she's a 11/11 on herself. Then I drop the egg and the smith, and I swing into him with 4. Since I control both smiths that both say fire sources deal 1 more. Or rather fire J resonators deal 1 more, but that's essentially the same in my deck since I don't have damage spells. He decides to call another magic stone. Down comes one of the 2 Ruler's Memoria. Since he controls a Regalia, it comes in unrested. Paying 2 for a Grimia, a rather good play here since it's a 2-cost 12/12. Then he decides to end his turn since he can't do much else. I pay 4 to Judgment here and kill his Grimia since Sylvia's anti-effect says deal 1000 damage and both Smith say deals +1, so I ping his Grimia for 12 damage and I recover 3 stones since the Resonator died that got dealt damage by Sylvia. I want to swing, but he uses Zero's ability and lets Sylvia lose all her effects, swiftness and flying. So I cannot swing. Then I swing for 8 with the 2 smiths, and then he removes 1 from the game and I end the turn. He debates on whether or not to play Zero, but decides to call a stone. Then now he's unsure to pay the 3 life, but he decides to do so. So he goes down to 15, while I am still on 36, and that's exactly the point where I want him, since I am an aggressive deck and he is the control type of deck. He now is on rather low life, and I need to lay low, sadly. Just kill my Rock Egg and then search my deck for a card. Fire Resonator specifically. I'm thinking about taking Sylvia Gilpalarila's Infernal Dragon for a second, but then decide to take Guinevere. Then I play the new Melgus edition, Road to the Flame King, since it gives my board Pierce, which is a rather important part of my deck, and yeah, decide to just pass the turn there, since I don't really want to do anything. Now he flips into 0, which is kind of bad for me since Sylvia now loses flying and all my other resonators now lose flying and swiftness. And he decides to play Blazer. He swings at me with Mistletoe. I decide not to block since it doesn't matter anyway, since my blocker would have died. I go down to 24 and then draw a card, since it is my turn. I'm not sure on to do that, and then I will use the Rock Egg to do that. I will search my deck for a Fire Resonator and then draw 2 cards and discard 1. Looking at the different Sylvias I could choose from, but I still decide to choose that Sylvia since it is the best Sylvia that I could play, and then I draw 2 cards and decide to ditch the Sylvia that I just searched. I play my second Gleipnir and then force him to block and attack with my Sylvia. I do not want him to draw that cards with Blazer. Yeah. So I force him to block with Blazer and then attack him for 4 direct damage and 7 or 8 damage on the Blazer. He dies and I draw 2 cards since I control 2 Gleipnir and dealt direct damage. I recover 3 stones in response to her effect Float 2, and then use 1 floating and 2 floating and 1 stone to play Cthugha, but I could have just used regular stones since I will not pay for any card else in this game anymore. Then I will end my turn since Cthugha does not have swiftness because of 0. He likes having that many magic stones, but then his internet starts to glitch out for a second, and then, well, he has to rejoin the match, but that does not consider, well, he wants to play Dark Alice, but since his internet has stopped working, well, he has to reload and do that part all over. That's not that much of a problem since nothing much happened anyway. I consider my board state there and see that I can kill him next turn if he does not see my bluff. He's back in this position, and then he will recover and try to play the Dark Alice. tries to play Gleipnir, but I remind him that the effect of Dark Ellis is he draws a card, then benches a card, or discards a card, and then does it again, so his Gleipnir stays in his hand until he actually done both. Decides to ditch a Cage of Mother Goose, since he considers and discards another Gleipnir. Plays one Gleipnir, the other one is in the graveyard, but the game lags a bit. He decides to remove my Malgus edition, and then decides to swing into my Sylvia with his 0, and then thinks about swinging into Sylvia with Mistletoe, but then thinks it's a stupid turn since I then would have access to green again. So he decides to swing at me instead. We go through with his thing, and then he remembers. And I of course let him go back because it's a friendly game, not that much of a hard game. And I decide to just take the 12, but yeah. With my Sylvia and my Smith on board, I will now continue my scheming and hopefully draw something good. If not, I have won anyway. Since in his end turn he recovers one thing, I need to force that to block. And he decides to recover his 0. Yeah. Then it takes a bit longer till he realizes that he has to pass the turn. And he does not really remember that. He tells me that he most certainly did a lot of misplays. I did as well, but I don't really tell him that. I tell him my scheme, and then he ends his turn. I recover and I force his 0 to block. A little mistake on my side. I would have had to pay 2 for that, but that wouldn't have been a problem since I had the mana open anyway. And then I just close out the game with literal 8 damage because of Sylvia, and I draw 2 cards. A little sacrifice can never hurt. Yeah. And then he decides to, well, end the game. Yeah. He told me that he made a mistake since he let through the 10 damage of the Cthugha earlier, and I just agree, since this is, well, the point where I dealt most damage to him in one single blow. And if it went for that Sandora Smith, I would have most certainly not won the game. So I'm glad about deciding to keep him on board instead of sacrificing him to the Guinevere. And then we go to game 2. I draw my 5 cards in hand and then decide to bottom the rock egg and some other cards that I don't really need in the early game. I am very happy about that Gleipnir, but turns out that I will not really need that. I will start the game by producing a red greenstone, one of the 4 that I play, and then tap that to play the Melgus edition and the Gleipnir. He's having small internet problems, but not as major. And then he thinks about taking the 3 damage, which he then does. Here we see that Acolyte of the Sun coming into play again. Same as in the first game. Yeah. And his Gleipnir. Gleipnir is often overlooked as 0 cost Regalia, but I think it is very good since you can force your opponent to block with that. And forced blocks are usually better than real blocks. Here comes my Windseclude Refuge, which does not do that much, and I draw into Gleipnir that I drop as well. He thinks that I'm having a good game, but I do not, since my hand is kind of bad. But in reviewing I see that I should have played the Sandora Smith and the Egg here, and then just should have destroyed his Acolyte. He's thinking on what to discard with the Dark Alice. As always, he banished the Dark Alice first. He decides to get rid of a Mistletoe. Down comes a second Acolyte, which then does a very good job for him in this game. He decides to play the Zero Owl, Zero's Familiar, which is when he controls his Zero J-Ruler, an 8/8 flying, which is very bad for me, so I have to discard that. I luckily draw into a Cthugha, which I can incarnate my Rock Egg into, searching me another Cthugha. He's having minor internet problems again. I get my Cthugha. Then I will attack and force his Acolyte of the Sun to block. He in response taps her to block for, to tap her down for will, and loses the connection. Just a few seconds later he will rejoin. He's tapping down his Acolyte of the Sun in my response to the thing, and he will block with his Mage Jack, and he gains 4 life because of the Mage Jack, and then again 4 life because of the crystals. But he loses 100 life through the Melgus edition, since my Cthugha has Pierce. Now I play the he asked me why I didn't play the blacksmith earlier, but I have no answer to that, and I swing with the Kthugga. And at this point, I should have actually forced him to block with his awl, since it was way too dangerous to let it stay alive. It would have been worth sacrificing a Kthugga to kill that owl. He now wants to judgment, but I remind him that he should rather use the acolytes of the sun to judgment her, since the stones could potentially produce him the black he needs. He then puts 3 counters on the owl to remind himself of the buff that it gets since his J-rule is out. He swings at me for 8 flying, which I can do nothing against, since I only have 2 cards that are flying. 0 is a very strong J-ruler, since he has stats of 11-11 and does not take battle damage. I play a stone, and then I think I just passed the turn. Either that or I played the rock egg. Yes. Then I'm thinking about swinging into the rock egg, but I decide against swinging into the acolyte. Now I think of different ways to get rid of the owl to kill his 0, so that my Sylvia can potentially still do something. But I made a mistake earlier and cannot kill the owl. Now, since his sword comes down, I have no way of destroying his 0, and yeah. He forces me to block with my Sandora blacksmith. I'm looking at Gleipnir and see if I can force myself to block, but I cannot. So my Zandora blacksmith has to block. And then he attacks me with 8. I draw my card for turn, and then judgment my ruler. And I think I shoot his bird, but I think about just killing my rock egg, which was a mistake. I should have killed the rock egg in this situation, since it would have searched my deck for a resonator that I could have used potentially. I'm making a lot of mistakes in this game, and that's why I'm going to lose it in the end. I swing into his acolyte, as I should have done it way earlier, and I will try to kill his other acolyte with a burnt cooking. He removes, he plays the Shadow Axe to kill my Kthugga, and then I will kill his Shadow Axe with my burnt cooking. I forgot that I didn't use that on that. And then I think about playing that Sylvia that I have in hand, just so I could have a blocker potentially. But I decide against it, since it wouldn't be that much of a thing. I then end my turn and let him have his win. He then forces my Sylvia to block. I make another error since I should have used the wind secluded refuge to just cancel that ability and then block with the rock egg. I think about any ways that I could have potentially to kill his zero, but I don't have any in my deck. I draw that Sylvia's Burning Flame, but it doesn't do much for me since I don't have a second one to kill his zero, and that would have probably made me win the game. I will draw Sylvia's Burning Flame in the next turn, but I don't know about that, and so I attack with the Cthugha, I think, or I will blast his Acolyte of the Sun with that. Oh well, no, I decide to use it on the Cthugha and try to force him to block with his Acolyte, but then he just removes my my Cthugha from game with his flashing lights. I use the Wind Seclude Refuge there, and he just does it again. And at that point I see myself not being able to do anything anymore, and should have potentially done anything. I try to block with my Rock Egg, and he removes it from the game to not leave me any chance to do something. And I take 2 damage, down to 3, and I'm very close before dying. I draw the second Sylvia's Burning Flame that I could have used last turn. I would have paid 3 will to do that, but in the end I just more or less give up since I can't do anything. I blast his Acolyte of the Sun out of the way, but that doesn't do much since he can just force me to block with my Sylvia and then win the game. Playing his Mage Jack and getting 4 life before recovery so he can attack with that, and then he finishes me with the Mage Jack since I block his 0. Then we decided to go to game 3 shortly after that, since I lost, and in this game I made so many misplays and errors that I just had no chance in the end, since his 0 just dominates his the board. Then we'll go to game 3. In game 3 we roll the dice again, since I don't really care if I'm first or second, and I go second. I draw my 5 cards, again see that Gleipnir, which I'm very fond of, and decide to ditch a Sylvia and a Final Breeze, since I don't really need that. For his first turn, he draws a standard black white stone, and then ends his turn. I draw into a Gleipnir and then play my red green stone and drop both my Gleipnir in turn 1. And the Melgus edition, since I need that PS. During his turn, he calls a stone. It's another Heaven's Rift, but he does not really do anything even with that. Since he seems to have a very expensive hand. I draw into a Cthugha, which is fairly good for me, and then I will call a stone and pay for Guinevere. Goes into his turn, since I don't do anything else. He then draws into that Ruler's Memoria, but that comes into play rest since he does not control a Regalia. I'm lucky about that, since that means he is blocked for another turn, but seemingly I can't do anything as well. Play myself another stone, and then put a Rakek into play, and of course Cthugha that into another Cthugha. I swing into him for 5, and he decides to play a Mage Jack to just abuse him, but I Guinevere my Cthugha, and then draw 2 cards and discard a card. And then I Cthugha my Guinevere away, which he didn't expect, and I swung into him again. This time though for a bit more, since I decide to play that Sylvia's Burning Flame. Oh well, no, I did not. Okay, then that was later in that game. He then plays the Excalibur Axe and a Gleipnir, and then swings into me for 4. I decide to just take the 4 damage and let him go back up to 39. He then ends his turn, and I draw into another Melgus edition, and then decide to just Judgment at that point, since he only controls that Mage Jack, and I can just blast that right off the game. I then pay 3 to play Sylvia and deal as much damage to him in this turn as I can. He lets my Sylvia lose the swiftness and the flying, then takes 13 damage of my Sylvia and my Cthugha. He's thinking on what to do. And then just decides to Judgment his 0 to get rid of my flying. at this point I've just lost the game, since he now has a 15-15-0 that does not take battle damage and is safe from most things. And then he gets rid of my Malgus edition with a Cage of Mother Goose, which he can pay 0 for, since he rested the Mage Jack for that, and he gained 4 life because of the crystals that his deck does not use regularly. I asked him if Zero gets rid of Pierce as well. She doesn't. That's one thing that is good for me. I then decide to force him to block with 0, and I swing into him with 5. Then I attack with Sylvia, and he resuscitating wills his 0, and I Sylvia's Burning Flame my Sylvia. That was stupid though, since I just should have saved her with that high speed dash. Yes. I decided to let my Sylvia die and just draw 3 cards, since I control 3 Gleipnir, and I would have drawn 6 cards since he blocked with his J-Ruler, but then I remembered that his J-Ruler does not get dealt damaged while battling, so I returned the 3 most recent cards that I drew onto the deck. Not in the particular right order, but that does not matter since I can't do anything anyway. Then play a Sandora Blacksmith in a last futile attempt to save this game for me, but it does not do anything, since I just deal him some more damage and then end my turn. Looking at both those high speed dashes in my hand, and then cursing myself for leaving the wrong stone open. Then attacks me with his Mage Jack and forces my Sandora Blacksmith to block. And at that point I have no chance of turning that game around. He then pays 4 and strips my hand of that Sylvia and the Malgus edition. Nidhogg is a very strong card, but he only plays 1, since I at least know that this will be the last time. He then attacks my Sylvia with his 0 and then ends his turn. And at that point I can just do one thing, that would be play one of the few combos that I play in my deck, just to put a card on the chase, and then play Final Breeze to return it back to the hand and abuse the torrent of the Final Breeze in that way to just block him from putting spells on the chase this turn. And he cannot respond, since I did it during his recovery phase. But then he attacks me with both his 12-12 Nidhogg and his 15-15 0, and then thinks about attacking me with the Mage Jack, but then does, since I remind him that none of my deck has swiftness anymore because of his 0. and then I just draw into that into that third high-speed dash, and then just end my turn, since I can literally do nothing. Then puts into play a Gleipnir and just swings with something, and that ends the game. Decides to play the familiar before killing me, but then just kills me with his 15-15-0, and that's the end of the game. Thank you for watching, and if you like that video and that voiceover, well, watch another one.